Welcome back. Voices from Zion, Robbie, and the Rabbi, and how exciting we last week, because last week was the Feast of Pentecost, or the Feast of Weeks, or the Feast of Fruits. We're getting into all those things. We were talking about barley and wheat, but oh my goodness, where we get to go today. So, Rabbi?
Thank you so much, Pastor Robbie. So just to get back into the groove, we noted that there are 5 explicit spots in the 5 books of Moses in which this festival appears, and what is extraordinary and extraordinarily confusing is it doesn't appear twice by the same name. So I think what we focused upon in particular last time was the way Feast of Harvest in Exodus chapter 23 morphs after the sin of the golden calf in Exodus chapter 34 to Feast of Weeks, where Feast of Weeks in Exodus chapter 34 means absolutely nothing. You don't have a clue. You need to get to Leviticus chapter 23, where there is a very detailed description of the manner in which the 7 weeks are going to be reckoned from the day after Passover. In Leviticus chapter 23, verse 15, numbering 7 weeks, 7 Sabbaths. And in Leviticus chapter 23, the name of the feast is, of course, conspicuously not there. It's just a holy convocation, because Leviticus chapter 23 is really coming to tell you just what the Feast of Weeks, about which we read in Exodus chapter 34, means. It's not simply a harvest festival. Of course, the Feast of the Harvest in Exodus chapter 23 wasn't just simply a harvest festival. It wasn't celebrating the harvest. That would be celebrating our receiving rather than a summons for what we need to do. And what Feast of Weeks emphasizes is precisely that. And it needs, of course, to illuminate what the Feast of Harvest means, because it also is something that we need to do. We're not simply sitting back and enjoying the harvest. Rather, on the contrary, the material bounty of the harvest is a summons for us to do something active in deepening our connection with God. And of course, that was first and foremost, with respect to the Festival of Weeks, that issue of the Omer offering of the day after Passover, which is from the barley harvest, and take that up to the wheat offering, the 2 loaves that are brought of fine wheat flour on Pentecost. So we discussed that, and we'll put that on the side right now, although we will at some point need to return to it. But there's an additional motif that also cropped up in these various passages, but came to its culmination specifically in Numbers chapter 28. And I'm referring to the first fruits. Because in Exodus chapter 23, it was, in verse 16, the Feast of Harvest, the first fruits of your labors. So first fruits was there. Exodus chapter 34, well, it was the Feast of Weeks, but it was also the first fruits of the wheat harvest. So first fruits was also a thing there. And in Leviticus chapter 23, in reflecting upon these 2 loaves that are brought as an offering before the Lord on Pentecost, we read in verse 17, you shall bring out of your dwellings 2 wave loaves, 2/10 parts of an ephah. They shall be of fine wheat flour. They shall be baked with leaven for first fruits unto the Lord. And again in verse 20, the priest shall wave them with the bread of the first fruits for a wave offering before the Lord. So first fruits cropped up in one form or another in each of these contexts. But then you get to Numbers chapter 28, boy, it's the name already. It's the day of the first fruits. Now, in point of fact, Feast of Weeks also crops up here, but it is secondary. It's when you bring a new meal offering unto the Lord in your Feast of Weeks. But the identity of the day is the day of first fruits. So inevitably, we're going to need to reflect on just what the day of the first fruits conveys to us. So shall we launch into it?
Yes, you definitely whet my appetite for what it. So if I'm following you, and maybe I should just, and follow you a bit to say, okay, the whole time that you are counting these weeks, you're preparing, you're doing something, realizing that you're serving the Lord in a way, preparing for this feast, which, based on history, from what I understand, especially recent history, it's a phenomenal celebration of what God has done for the state of Israel. But as you said, there's some part of it that we're supposed to take and prepare ourselves for. So obviously that's kind of what I'm getting. And so first fruits is going to be part of where we're headed, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And of course, inevitably, in this subject, on some level, I'll say, in all these subjects, there's going to be some kind of an interplay between the dimension that is exquisitely personal and focused upon the individual, and the element that is general and focuses upon the greater community. And I think first fruits actually accentuates that.
Good.
That is, on the one hand, the first fruits, it's something that everyone brings as an individual to the temple, where everyone as an individual will make a solemn declaration before the Lord. And simultaneously, if you don't do it as an individual, you do it in the context of a community. Traditionally, especially because we appreciate that both in terms of perhaps the peculiar botanical varieties that grew in different places, and because of climatic differences in different locations in the land of Israel, the time of ripening of the first fruits would vary from place to place. Communities get together and converge upon Jerusalem as a community, bringing the first fruits. But then no two communities are exactly the same. So there is that element of the communal, and there's the element of the individual, and there's the element of one community as opposed to another, and everyone has a kind of a piece of the action, if you will. And I think that's part of the grand experience of bringing the first fruits to the Holy Temple. Just as a general observation, inevitably focusing upon Numbers chapter 28 and seeing it as, of course, inevitably we see everything as something prescriptive that tells us how to live, how to resonate with the rhythm that the Torah establishes. The fact that Pentecost is explicitly identified as the day of the first fruits in Numbers chapter 28, verse 26, actually has practical significance, especially when we consider that first fruits ripen different stages, different places, different dates. And as a result, you can't tell everyone to bring first fruits at the same time, because so-and-so's first fruits are ripened today, and so-and-so only another few weeks. And it also depends on the species. We'll get the species shortly. But you can't bring the first fruits before Pentecost, because after all, it is designated by God as the day of the first fruits. So that's the first day. It's not the last day. There'll be people bringing the first fruits to the Holy Temple over the course of the entire summer, even through tabernacles. The first day of Pentecost.
Really? So,
well, yeah.
They still, so that's why it says also in the day of the first fruits when you bring a new, so the Pentecost is like the starting point, and people that have already had their harvest are bringing them then. But other people, it might be later in the summer. Yet, do they come to the temple for the festival anyway?
Sure, that is, it's one way or another. Pentecost is a pilgrimage festival, whether you call it the Harvest Festival or the Feast of Weeks or the Day of the First Fruits. It's one of the pilgrimage festivals. Everyone comes for Pentecost, but you may not be coming with your first fruits. You might be coming back sometime later on in the summer, depending upon
Really?
the crop and the geographical circumstances that may lead to a different rate of ripening.
Well, there you go. Just to begin with, I had no understanding of that, but that's cool. All
Yeah,
right.
I'm like, of course, as we both know, I'm saying all this, and of course, it's exciting to talk about it, but there's also the sadness that we don't have the Holy Temple. We can't bring the first fruits. Even though the land is producing once again, it's not like the land of Israel that Mark Twain or any of his contemporaries saw, in which first fruits, try talking about any fruits. You see the land flourishing. You see, on some level, and we've noted this, the fulfillment of Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 8. You, O mountains of Israel, shoot forth your branches, yield forth your fruits for my people Israel, for they are near at hand to come. And the implication of that verse, near at hand, when you see the land of Israel awakening from its 2 millennium long slumber, then you know that the ingathering is at hand. So all of this is just mind-boggling. And of course, this is our series about prophecies more current than today's newspapers.
Right.
We're not there yet. We still don't have the Holy Temple. And we can talk about bringing the first fruits, but we can't bring them. We have to be grateful for what we've got. And,
yes.
And implore God for what we're still awaiting. Okay, but on the subject of the first fruits, inevitably, we're going to have to introduce, besides the 5 passages in which Pentecost appears explicitly in the 5 books of Moses, another passage. I mentioned at the outset there were 2 oblique references to Pentecost that weren't explicit. And one of them inevitably is going to have to be Deuteronomy chapter 26. Deuteronomy chapter 26 mentions Pentecost on a total of exactly 0 occasions. But it's all about the first fruits. So let's take it from the top. From the first verse. It shall be when you are come in unto the land which the Lord your God gives you for an inheritance, and possess it, and dwell therein, that you shall take of the first of all the fruit of the ground, which you shall bring in from your land that the Lord your God gives you, and you shall put it in a basket, and shall go unto the place which the Lord your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. And you shall come unto the priest that shall be in those days, and say unto him, I profess this day unto the Lord your God that I am come unto the land which the Lord swore unto our fathers to give us. And the priest shall take the basket out of your hand and set it down before the altar of the Lord your God. I think I need to at least note parenthetically here that while, of course, we can't actually engage in this ceremony in the absence of the Holy Temple, still in all, you go to any kindergarten in the land of Israel and you will see the children performing this. Obviously, as a skit, as a performance, but it's something that is just so deeply ingrained in our consciousness in the land of Israel. There are children's songs about bringing the first fruits to the Holy Temple. So, of course, there is the plain and simple, and there is the increasing level of sublimity. Because it doesn't just end with bringing the basket. What commences in verse 5 is the declaration made by each and every individual as an individual upon bringing the first fruits to the Holy Temple. So here we get the sense of it's not just a matter of being part of the community. No, you as an individual bring these first fruits and you make this declaration. And for the record, verse 5, you shall speak and say before the Lord your God, it's in the singular. Of course, all these verses are in the singular, but this declaration in particular, in being cast in the singular, you do it, singular. In Hebrew, of course, there is the singular conjugation and there is the plural conjugation. It's all in the singular. Everything in this entire chapter heretofore is all in the singular. Ironically, even though once you get to the subsequent verses in this declaration, you do speak in the plural. You speak about how God brought us forth from Egypt. So there is that aspect of the collective, and such an intricate interleaving, because you are an individual and you count as an individual, but you count as an individual also by being part of a greater whole, which is, I think, one of the most profound and simultaneously fundamental messages in the interplay between singular and plural throughout the Torah, and certainly here as well.
Beautiful. Yes, absolutely.
Now, there's, of course, an additional dimension that I need to note here. This declaration is essentially an overview of all of the history of Israel, starting with an Aramean sought to destroy my father, the story of the patriarchs, the going down to Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, bringing us into this place. In verse 9, giving us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Hold on to that, because we're going to have to return to this flowing with milk and honey very shortly. But before we do, basic observation. You appreciate all of the verses that speak of the land, speak very explicitly of the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance. The first fruits are brought only from the produce of the land of Israel. And there's inevitably an additional dimension that we need to consider in appreciating that point. The first fruits are also only brought from the list of the 7 species with which the land of Israel is praised in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 8. A land of wheat and barley and grapevines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of oil olive trees and date honey. Those are the 7 species. You have wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates, from which the first fruits are to be brought. You can decorate them with other species as well. That's a whole additional dimension, but the essence, the core, these first fruits. And inevitably, we can't help but ask ourselves, why? Why specifically these? Especially when you consider that there are other lists that we encounter in the Torah about special species in the land of Israel. Just consider, we've been speaking a lot about the cycle of the holy days in Leviticus chapter 23. Well, in Leviticus chapter 23, in the context of the Feast of Tabernacles, we read in verse 40, you shall take unto you on the first day the fruit of goodly trees, the branches of palm trees, the boughs of thick trees, and willows of the brook. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. This is the list of the 4 species that we take and wave as an active devotion before God on tabernacles. And we can have a whole long discussion as to what they signify. The way we understand these somewhat cryptic references to the species, the fruit of goodly trees pertains to the citron, the branches of palm trees to the palm branch, boughs of thick trees referring to the myrtle, and willows of the brook, the willow branches. Well, that's a completely different set of species that are used on tabernacles. That's not the list that's relevant with respect to the first fruits. We could also note, even earlier on, a list of species that explicitly appears as choice fruits of the land, namely in Genesis chapter 43, when Jacob is coaching his sons for their return to the strange mystery ruler of Egypt, who seems to have it out for them. We read in verse 11, their father Israel said unto them, if it be so that you're going back to Egypt now, to this strange mystery ruler, then do this, take of the choice fruits of the land in your vessels, and carry down to the man a present, a little balm, a little honey, spicery and ladanum, nuts and almonds. And again, a completely different list. So what's special about this list of 7 species in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 8? And I need to share with you, this is something that I learned, I guess, several decades ago. When our children were little, we had a practice on the intermediate days of the festival. That's the intermediate days of tabernacles and the intermediate days of Passover, to go on family outings. And we would go to different spots throughout the land. So did just about everyone else. So there was a tendency to be crowded, but that was okay. And one year we went to a lovely set of botanical gardens called Neot Kedumim. Neot Kedumim has planted within it all of the flora that is mentioned in the Bible. And they don't just have all the flora planted, they have it organized. So you have these different trails through these botanical gardens in order to connect with the flora of the Bible. And we went on the trail of the 7 species. And we had a guide, and I still vividly remember the guide making the observation that there was something special botanically about these 7 species. Again, wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. Each one, for a unique set of reasons, is particularly sensitive to changes in the weather this time of year. When I say this time of year, I mean between Passover and Pentecost. It is the season of shifting. That is, on some level, how we describe it in Hebrew as onat ma'avar, the season when everything is changing. Because in the land of Israel, and this is obvious in the Bible, and it's just obvious for anyone who lives here, there's the rainy season, which is winter. There's the dry season, which is summer. And then there are the seams, when one morphs into the other. And because the land of Israel, as we well know, is at the bridge of continents, it is that cockpit of Europe, Asia, and Africa. It's also at a very central location with respect to dominant climatic forces. And so one vying with the other can, on the one hand, this time of year, bring in an exceptional cold front. And there can even be torrential rain, even though we stopped praying for rain on the first day of Passover. And simultaneously, you can have scorching hot weather. And these 2 alternatives can be separated literally by hours. It can change that precipitously. And again, these species are very sensitive to those changes. The difference between what the weather is like between Passover and Pentecost can spell the difference between a bountiful harvest and a complete disaster. And I suppose naturally, the pagan Canaanites who lived here in the land in the time of the patriarchs, before Israel's entry in the land, developed a whole pagan cult that revolved around these 7 species, because it was of existential importance, of course, to have the bountiful harvest. Well, how do you get the bountiful harvest if you are a pagan? You need to butter up the gods, do whatever you need to do in order to get the goods. So these 7 species figured prominently, particularly this time of year, which was the time of utmost vulnerability in these pagan rituals that were intended to secure a bountiful harvest. Obviously, part of the message of the Torah is that paganism is flying out the window. Forget about it. You're serving God. But maybe on an even more sublime level, you are not serving God in order to get a bountiful harvest. No. This whole ceremony of the first fruits coming from the 7 species is after the harvest. You're not thinking about how to get the harvest. Rather, not what do you do to get the harvest, what do you do with the harvest in connecting with God? And this whole ceremony, again, is a summons to take the 7 species and focus upon how the material bounty becomes the means to spiritual transcendence. You've harvested these species. You don't say, okay, now let's just dive in and consume it all. No. First thing you're going to do is you're going to separate the first fruits, if anything, for the farmer who has been doing his utmost in order to be able to get to this harvest in the first place. The most precious component, first fruits. What do you do with them? You consecrate them to God. You bring it to the Holy Temple. And more than merely recognizing that, you see the totality of your material bounty merely as means to a spiritual end. Oh, maybe I should just delete the word merely. That's what makes it great, that it is means to a spiritual end. Just it's not an end in itself. That's critical. So, of course, the first fruits really exemplify that lesson and drive home that message. And, of course, inevitably, when we consider the identity of Pentecost as the day of the first fruits, whether you're actually bringing the first fruits on that day or not, isn't that what it's all about? That is, recognizing, once again, how the material is means to the spiritual. Just as you start harvesting, you start counting, not counting up to the harvest as if that's the be-all and end-all of everything. You count from the beginning of the harvest until Pentecost. You count days of spiritual growth and development. You count to make every day count. So too are the first fruits. You count in order to appreciate how whatever you have gathered is going to be means to a spiritual end, which is, of course, always necessarily the most critical. Now, there's an additional dimension here. And inevitably, the plot thickens when you start talking about the first fruits in this regard. And that is, when we bear in mind that list of the 7 species, well, we don't get the entire list in another passage in the Torah, but we get 3 representatives in a critical and very, very sad and vexing episode that we read in Numbers chapter 13. The sin of the spies. Now, with respect to the subject of first fruits, I'm not going to say there's an oblique reference to first fruits in Numbers chapter 13, because it's not oblique, it's explicit. The time the spies came to land was the time of the first fruits of the grape harvest. That's explicit in Numbers chapter 13, verse 20. And very much apropos of being the beginning of the grape harvest, we read in verse 23, they came unto the valley of Eshcol, and cut down from thence a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they bore it upon a pole between two. And they took also of the pomegranates and of the figs. Grapes, pomegranates, figs. 3 of the list. And what did they do with them? Verse 26, they went and came to Moses and to Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel unto the wilderness of Paran, to Kadesh, and brought back word unto them and unto all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. The fruit they had taken, the grapes, the figs, and the pomegranates. And they told him, we came unto the land where you sent us, and surely it flows with milk and honey. We already encountered that in the passage of the declaration of the first fruits. We're going to still get back to that. And this is its fruit. Okay, take a look at it. That's the end. You're not going there. The people that dwell in the land are fierce. The cities are fortified and very great. Moreover, we saw the children of Anak, giants there. We're not going in. And in verse 30, Caleb attempts to rectify the situation. We should go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. And the men that went up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than, the Hebrew reads, mimenu, which can be translated as, they are stronger than we. It could also be translated as, they are stronger than he. Oh my God. A complete heresy. Things go from bad to worse. And they produced an evil report of the land which they had spied out unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have passed to spy it out is a land that eats up its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. We're not going in. And the great debacle that resulted in 40 years of wandering in the wilderness unfolds. And if we ask, what was that poison root that underlay the whole story? The moment you see that fruit as an end and not as means. Here's the fruit, take it, leave it, forget it. No. That's not the idea. The fruit, the material bounty, is means to the spiritual. No, we're not there. They're stronger than he. And everything completely gets unraveled. And on some level, we indeed see bringing the first fruits to the Holy Temple as a kind of attempt at rectification of that grievous sin of our turning our backs in the Holy Land that God gave us. So
that's a beautiful lesson. Yeah, it's and clearly, all over the world. I guess that's the way we've looked at our work for, the purpose of the work is the harvest, so to speak. And I can even remember, I'm the Christian car guy. I came up in the car business. I sold cars. And at some point in time, I realized this isn't about the commissions. Like, if I just do what I just really try to help people, just go in there and see if I can really help them get the best car and whatever, I'll get paid fine. I disassociated the commission with my work. And God that's a gift that really I've known a lot of wise people that get that, but it's exactly what you're describing. Is you get to partner with God to do whatever work, and then you just trust Him to take care of you, whatever that may look like. Um, but I love that, and I hate we're out of time because I was just looking at this. I was hoping you're going to go into the declaration that show us, but what you shared was beyond wonderful, of the 8 species, and I have to also add seven species. It's in Deuteronomy 8, and so
Deuteronomy 8, chapter 8, verse 8. So yeah, you got the number 8 there.
But the 7 species, when I became very aware of them, my wife and I went on what we called the 7 Foods of the Promised Land diet. And so for the better part of probably almost 100 days, we ate nothing but those foods. All sorts of amazing salads and things you can do if you're just using wheat and barley and figs. And we actually went and got wheat berries, and we got barley berry, and so that if we made something with wheat, we ground the wheat to make whatever that may be. And the result of that was both of us, of course, lost weight, inflammation, but I came off half of my diabetic medicine. I came off almost all of my blood pressure medicine. In other words, that when God says that food is good, your body knows it. I mean, it's like, and then I would, and also you made me hungry to know what the connection is between the sensitivity to the weather of the species. Like, anyway, there's so much that you opened up the box that I have to now go think about. But that's the beauty of listening to this lecture, or the understanding of what Rabbi Haim is bringing. It is hopefully, like you, it whets your appetite to dig into these passages and see what God has for you, because I can assure you, yes, we get to eat of this bounty, but the bounty is spiritual, and in a connection of coming back and not only enjoying the fruit, but enjoying it with God in a way. And I've heard this said, and we talked about how the Jews were told that they were to go serve God in the desert. And I've come to understand that God not only wants you to do stuff for Him, He actually wants you to do stuff with Him.
Absolutely. This is something that's just so foundational in the Torah. The greatest gift that God gives us is He invites us to be His junior partners.
Right.
And you expressed it so beautifully in talking about, as Christian car guy, what can I do to put the best set of wheels underneath this prospective client? And the commission is completely ancillary. You have an opportunity to be able to be a dispenser of God's goodness to this person who's come into your dealership and is in need of a set of wheels. It reminds me, I remember this decades ago, one of my mentors commenting, and it was, of course, not to be exclusive about this particular line of work, but making the comment that a hotel manager, if he has the right attitude, is constantly serving the Lord. He's welcoming wayfarers into his inn. Well, of course he's getting paid. If he wouldn't be getting paid, he would run out of business, and he wouldn't be able to continue to bring in wayfarers. But if he sees being paid just as means to acting as a dispenser of God's hospitality to people in need of a place to stay, then he's constantly serving the Lord. Obviously, there could be people who, shall we say, get it backwards and miss out on this opportunity. And the thing is true really with respect to every legitimate profession under the sun. I say every legitimate profession because, by definition, if someone is prepared to pay you to do a job, that means you are providing either a good or a service that can bestow goodness upon the world. So if we focus on I can bestow goodness now, then I'm being God's junior partner. God is the giver of everything, and we are serving as a conduit of God's goodness, being dispensed throughout the world. Of course, we need to eat. We need to be able to survive. We need to be able to make ends meet in order to be able to continue doing that. There's nothing wrong with that. There isn't any summons to become destitute, but to appreciate that whatever it is that we're doing in order to provide the upkeep for this glorious world that God has given us.
That's beautiful.
All of the bounty as means to the spiritual. Now, I just have to note here, I realize we're out of time, but I haven't forgotten about my having placed myself in debt, because I already noted in both Deuteronomy chapter 26 and in Numbers chapter 13, we have this reference to the land flowing with milk and honey, which I already noted. We've got to discuss. Because, of course, in the Bible, it never says it's a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, of course, I could say it never says that because the Bible wasn't written in English and flowing with milk and honey is English. Duh. But on a more sublime plane, what we're going to need to consider is this verb that we've translated as flowing and appreciate. It is not normal. But I suspect that if we're out of time, we should just leave that abnormal flowing as a cliffhanger for next time.
I can hardly wait.
And inevitably, we're also going to have to note, in the same regard, that there is a very clear litmus test in Leviticus, in Deuteronomy, in the passage of Pentecost, and also in the passage of the first fruits. There's a litmus test. Did we get the message? Did we understand that the material is in service of the spiritual? We're going to have to see that inside, but to give you a sneak preview, you know what that litmus test is going to be? What are you using this material bounty for? Are you supporting those who are in need? Question mark. On that note, I'll continue.
Oh, wonderful. I can hardly wait. Shalom, my friend.
Shalom.
From Israel.
God bless you.
God bless you.